Hello! South Carolina Region Band auditions in all state are just right around the corner, so I thought I'd jump on and make a couple of videos for the junior level woodwind instruments. Today, obviously, is going to be clarinet. I'm going to play through the piece, then I'm going to go back measure by measure and kind of break it down and give my interpretations and how to get the most points from the judges. Here we go. First thing I want to talk about with this etude is that the dynamic contrast written isn't very extreme. It starts out a mezzo piano, goes to a mezzo forte, back down to piano, then it kind of lingers in the middle of mezzo piano until it crescendos to a forte at the very end. It stays in that middle ground way too long, and you have to work really hard to exaggerate those dynamics. I like to think about starting it maybe closer to a piano and then crescendoing it maybe closer to a forte, then bring it back down, exaggerating that piano even more, showing that contrast back and forth. And then through the lyrical section, I just kind of let the middle section rather, I kind of let the instrument do all the work for me. It already raises itself into the higher register, so then I'm just going to let the louder speaking higher notes just kind of carry me through until the end. Again, minimal effort to get the forte to come out in the highest register in the A ending, but it does need some control and consistency through there. And I want to focus on that instead of trying to push the dynamic because, again, the instrument's already going to speak very loudly in the higher clarion. All right, first things first. First four bars, crescendo 2, decrescendo 2. Let the phrase breathe, crescendo through, decrescendo. I like to end maybe a little softer than when I started just to show some more contrast in that crescendo of the second line into the mezzo forte. Also, I like to think about digging into the lower notes just a little bit of a crescendo into those lower notes, just to let them kind of resonate a little bit more. Same thing is going to apply into the next four bars. One thing I want to be very adamant about is the use of chromatic fingerings, especially in bar 7. It's a normal chromatic scale, just like you're going to play for this chromatic scale portion of the audition, but if you don't know the fingerings, then you're going to have a lot of flubs because it is a slurred passage. You can hide a lot of technical dirt in your technique just by articulating, but this is a slurred passage, so if we don't use the correct fingerings, it's going to just destroy us. The first chromatic fingering I want to talk about is A sharp to B natural. We're going to play A sharp just like B flat, and then we're going to use the sliver key right in between the middle and ring finger keys to raise it to a B natural. I like to articulate it on the outside of the key. The reason being, if I do it in the center, my fat fingers will kind of cover up the tone holes. So again, I like to do it on the outside. This is important also for the next note we're going to talk about, which is D to D sharp. It's going to be a D fingering, 1, 2 thumb, and then we're going to add this next sliver between the middle and ring finger of the left hand. Again, articulating it on the outside, again, so fat fingers don't get in the way, and it's a little bit easier to play that way. Last fingering is going to be F sharp, thumb F, and we're adding the two side keys on the side to articulate an F sharp. That kind of eliminates the flub from F sharp to F natural. Again, all these fingerings are to alleviate flubs or any kind of inconsistencies within the notes. Musically, for the second line, I like to start at a very soft dynamic, maybe even closer to piano, because I left off at a very soft dynamic in the line before. Then crescendo, exaggerate that crescendo, leading on the first note of the 16th groupings. This applies in bar 6 and in bar 7. And then I just sustain the phrase all the way through, keeping that mezzo forte dynamic all the way through the dotted half note C at the end of the line, so I can show some contrast for the piano of the third line. Going on to the third line of the etude, this is where the style really is challenging. We have slurs and staccatos and non-staccato notes. I think the important thing to observe is the notes that aren't staccato. There are very few of them, but if they are there, you can't articulate them as though you're articulating staccato. You want them to have the contrast. You want to show a dynamic range of staccato note, slur note, and non-staccato. First ones that stick out to me are in beat 3 of measure 9. Those are not staccato notes. Those need to be connected. And then again, it happens at the very end of the bar in bar 12. You have those last two notes are not staccatos. They need to be long tenuto articulation. When articulating after slurs, it's really important to have your fingers lined up with the articulation. Think about a smoother staccato. I know it sounds kind of redundant to think about a staccato and smoothness, but let the air in between the notes kind of guide the direction of the phrase. Do not let the staccatos kind of choke up and prevent the motion of the phrase. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about. Here's bar 10. Those staccatos are too short. They're already 16th notes. We don't need to make them any shorter. Any kind of separation is going to be magnified by the short duration of the note, so don't worry about it. This is how you should play those articulations. They still need to be connected, they still need to have energy, they still need to have direction. Another thing you might notice in my playing is that in bar 11, when I have the syncopated rhythm with those eighth notes and then eighth rests afterwards, I do not take a breath, I do not open my mouth, I do not unset my embouchure between those staccato syncopated notes. It's really important to keep the airstream going all the way through those notes, supporting all the way into the break through the upper register of the clarion, and then accenting the very top, slurring down, and then the tenuto articulation at the very end. Going on to bar 13, again, we're on a mezzo forte dynamic. We don't need to work too hard just because the instruments are already pretty high, and that speaks very well for us. Another thing to note, at the end of that line, there's a retardando. I like to think about retardandos as kind of like running into a pool with steps. Every step you take, your momentum's being slowed and slowed and slowed because of the more and more water that you're running up against. Same thing need here. As you go on, each note just needs to gradually slow down, and there needs to be tension and pull and stretch to it, just like, again, running into a pool. Fifth line. This one has a lot of lyrical challenges to it, mainly because of the range and the jumps that it includes. Style-wise, we have slurs, and that's fine. We can manage that. But we have a lot of jumps from the high end of the chalumeau, or the throat tones, to the clarion. My suggestion for you is to make sure you're supporting the open sound of the throat tones, or upper register of the chalumeau, to continue sporting into the clarion, or upper register. It's that support that's going to give you the ability to be flexible between those two registers. If you falter anyway with that support, you're not going to have the vibrations required to support that jump. Now on to the A ending. Make sure you started the same dynamic of which you left line 5. We do have a rest, but you still want to connect those two phrases dynamically. Another thing to note, just because it's the same rhythm as bar 5, you do not want to add extra staccatos to that. It does not have staccatos. You are crescendoing into the higher clarion, into those accented quarter notes and half note, and then triplets slurred all the way down to quarter notes into the dotted half note C at the end. It's important here that you keep this forte dynamic. It's the only time we have fortes. Don't worry about too much at the higher register of the clarion, but then focus more as you go lower and lower and lower into the throat tones of the horn to make sure those are an equal forte dynamic. Now on to the B ending. For those of you who are trying to get a head start or already made a callback, congratulations. Uh, Dynamically, it's very similar, except now instead of a crescendo into forte, it's a sudden forte off of the mezzo piano before. Again, because we're kind of already soft, we don't have to do much for the forte, especially since it starts in the higher clarion. We have a very similar rhythm to the first measure of the A ending. Again, very similar to bar 5, except still no staccatos. We don't have to worry about the crescendo now, but we still have to go to an accented lower note at the very end. Because of this, we do need a crescendo a little bit just to give the sense of the same dynamic because we are going lower into the horn. The lower we go, the less those notes are heard. The higher we go, the more those notes are heard. Just a great rule of thumb in general for any instrument. Similarly, we have triplets slurred at the very end, but now we have an ascending triplet at the very last bar into a high C. Just like before in supporting the throat tones, we do want to continue to support the note through the triplet so we don't let the high C jump out at the very end. Another thing I want to talk about with this B ending before I let you go is that the dotted 8th, 16th notes in the second bar are designed to trick you. The judges are going to be listening for the difference between your dotted 8th, 16th rhythms and your triplet rhythms. It's very important to think about 16th note subdivisions versus triplet subdivisions, especially when you're going from dotted 8th, 16th, dotted 8th, 16th, half note, followed by a whole bar of triplet eighths. This difference is crucial and will be listened for. I hope you found this video helpful in your region band or all-state preparations. I know it's right around the corner, so keep working, keep breathing. It'll all be fine, and good luck.